It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Logan Paulson there. Craig Hoffman here. And it is a mailbag actual Monday, Logan. We're recording this on a Monday for once, so we get to use the alliteration.
Yeah, I actually had to kind of do a little pump fake here. Got the schedules worked out, so here we are doing mailbag. And I'm excited for this mailbag. You kind of gave me a little sneak peek. Sometimes you tell me, sometimes you don't. And I like some of these questions. So,
would you prefer me to just tell you all the questions? Do you like sometimes being surprised?
Some of them require a little bit of research.
Yeah.
Some of them do. So I like to make sure I've looked at it. I've watched some film. I've looked at some stats, like that kind of stuff. But some of these I think are going to be fun. Like,
yeah.
not just kind of thought experiment level. So
yeah. No, I do try to, the ones that I know you're going to want to do the extra research on, or it's a better answer. I do try to tell you, although there are some times I'm like, I'm going to spring this one on him. I think that'll be more entertaining. That's ultimately what we're here to inform, but also to entertain. All right, this one comes from Jason to get us started, and it comes off the heels of our episode with Mina Kimes, which we hope you enjoyed. Thanks for all the nice comments and everyone that enjoyed Mina. So Jason says, I just finished the Mina Kimes episode, and I wanted to submit a question. And based on the discussion with Mina on Take Command, I wanted to get your take on something I learned from the roster building. Zach and Bobby are constantly mentioned by what people learn from 2024, but that doesn't tell the story. What I learned from 2024 is how intentional free agent signings can accelerate a roster build. Almost every coach had a veteran free agent brought in who had played for them before. How much do you think this contributed? And Jason did a ton of research and listed off all the different dudes from Dante Fowler and Tyler Biotish, who had been with Dan in Dallas, on through the position coaches. But, basically every coach that was brought in had someone who wasn't new to them. Anthony Lynn, Austin Eckler, on down the list. So, Logan, I think this is a particularly interesting question philosophically, but also Jason submitted this question for us to talk about either on the radio show or on this show. And I was like, one, we don't really do mailbag sections on the radio show, so definitely Take Command. And two, you were this person in San Francisco in some ways with Kyle Shanahan. So this is definitely a Take Command mailbag question. And that's long setup over. How do you answer this?
Yeah, so I think this is a really good question, and I'm going to kind of attack it two ways. First is kind of with a nihilistic approach, right? So obviously, it's important to bring in people that you know, right? It's important to bring in a level of familiarity, especially with guys that are kind of familiar with the scheme, right? Because it really expedites coaching. Like, you can just look to this person as an example of being like, hey, this is how we want to block outside zone, or this is what we do on SIFT, or this is what we do on split. Like, this is the difference. This is the call. And having that voice in there is really important. However, I think it's also important to understand that all of those free agents that were listed were guys that played well this year, right? And so, as much as you want to say, the familiarity is something that's important in a culture build, and I 100% think that is true. I think it's good to have, archetypes, monoliths of guys at the position, like Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz come to mind, and be like, this is how pros do it. This is how we do it. This is the expectation, right? That's super important. It works better if those guys play well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those guys are good at football. And I think when you look at Bobby, I think the staff had a really good understanding of what he is and what he isn't. And they were able to speak to his strengths. And so not only are you getting a guy that is an example of the culture, and I think we've seen versions of this before, like Thomas Davis coming here and not really playing well, not being able to, and that's not, he's a Hall of Fame, borderline Hall of Fame player. I'm just saying, when he got here.
When he got here to Washington at the end, that was not the Hall of Fame portion of his career.
Correct. And so obviously that he didn't help the team. And there's a great familiarity there with Ron and Davis, but that didn't work out. And so I do think it's helpful when you identify a piece that can be this example, that can be this monolith, be selective about your free agent sign, but they also got to be good football players, right? So kind of the second part of this question, when I was in San Francisco, this was something that I kind of viewed myself as being brought in to do. And maybe if you ask Kyle, he'd say something different, but I kind of felt like I was there to help expedite a cultural identity, right? And when I got there, obviously that was what I was trying to do, but things changed. My role changed on the team. My ability to do that changed. And then same thing in Atlanta, right? You come in with a certain expectation and you kind of got to fit the coaching staff and kind of fit the model of, fit the model of the team, of the roster. And so I think that's another element too, that's maybe ignored or undervalued in the question is like they could be brought in to be one thing, but obviously like the roster's the dynamic situation that is constantly changing. So yeah, long story short, I think yes, that these are important things that are really critical to any roster build. And most teams, when you look at free agency, they try to do a version of this with varying levels of success. And so I think when you look at the Commanders, for example, like I was just talking with someone today about Zach Ertz, like he had one of the best seasons I've seen from him in a long time, partially because he's healthy. Like if Zach's dinged up, are we still talking about the free agent class last year in the same breath, in the same light? So I think it's important to understand that, yes, that leadership, the familiarity is important, but they also need to come in and play good football. And I think that doesn't always happen in some of these kind of, familiarity free agent signings.
Yeah, I got a couple thoughts as well. And just to, click on that at the end, right? The cultural identity and all that kind of stuff. Dante Fowler was brought in to play a certain role, and he wound up playing a much bigger role. Right. And one of the biggest holes in this team was the expanded role that he had to play. Dante obviously had a double-digit sack season, made a ton of big plays, had what I would consider a very good season last year here in Washington. His lack of discipline and just doing the thing he's supposed to do in the run game was an enormous part of their run defense. That is who he has been his entire career. And Dan knew this, but he was the best option they had. And thus and despite the familiarity with Dan and Joe Witt and with Darryl Tapp up front, like they couldn't get that right. And it probably didn't help. So it can swing both ways. Like you said, if the role isn't right for the guy, then or he winds up having to do something different because football seasons are dynamic and roster dynamics are dynamic, and it is something totally different. So I think that would be thing one. Anything you wanted to add on that front before I get to my my second thing?
No, I think that's a perfect encapsulation of what I'm talking about. It's like, yeah, just because you're familiar with the guy doesn't mean he's going to fit with what you need him to do. So making sure you identify what you need this player to be, and then like his role in the team. Like I think if you would have said, hey, Fowler's going to be a designated pass rusher, that's what he's here for. Like I think that role would have been much better, right? But things changed, like we just talked about, and my role in San Francisco changed. And I think that's something that is always important to remember with these free agent signings.
So my second thing is more on the positive, like giving credence to this point, which is the longer I'm around this sport and this league specifically, I think just removing things you can trip over is such an enormous element of success. Maybe that's because I feel like that's how you see the game, and you and I, like you're the person I talk the most football with and the smartest football person that I know, so that I get to talk to on a regular basis at the very least. So that might be you rubbing off on me, but I genuinely think like if you can just not trip over your own shoelaces, you can get really far in this league. And the more guys you have that are familiar with the system, the more guys that are familiar with how you want things done, the less you're going to trip over your own shoelaces. Like if you have to teach 53 guys something new, that's a lot harder than teaching 33 guys what to do, especially when the other 20 are specifically designated to help teach the other 33. It makes the student to teacher ratio a lot better. And I also think, generally speaking, across all sports and all structures, I'll say, human structures, leadership is best when layered. And so if you have leaders that are at the coaching staff level saying the same thing at the senior player level, at the junior player level, at the executive level, like you are just going to get better results because everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction. And that if you get the right guys is a good way to ensure that you don't trip over your own shoelaces and get the boat rowing with everybody in the same direction.
Yeah, I think the other thing that kind of is like goes hand in hand with that is obviously you're talking about this, disseminating of information kind of top down, right? But I also think it goes the other way too, right? And I think one of the things about knowing the player is like, so coaching at the high school level has given me a small taste of this. The better you know the kid, the better you can put them in a better position to be successful. And I think Bobby's a great example of this, like knowing who Bobby is and knowing how they used him last year, they put him in a role where he's not going to be like on somebody's highlight reel because they understand what he does well, which is fit the run and command the defense. I'm not going to ask him to do too much really challenging coverage stuff, right? And I think that that's important. And that's something that Dan and the staff knew because they have a lot of exposure to him and they've watched a lot of film of him. And they probably have a great communication back and forth between the two parties. So I think that's the other way that's important. And people are always like, man, the NFL is such a nepotism based hiring system, right? But it's important that I know you. I know how you operate. I know what you're good at. I know what you're bad at, and I know what gaps you can fill, and I know what kind of person you are. And I think that's the same thing with, like, when Mina came on, she said, "Oh, it's friends of Dan or it's friends of Adam." Like, yes, that is true. But if you look around the league, like, that's how smart people do free agency most of the time, right? Because they say, I know Tyler Biadasz. I was with him every day. I know he's going to study. I know he's a good leader. And he might not be a great leader in Dallas, but I think he's ready for a bigger role here in Washington, right? And he was, and he did a great job of that. And I think that's important to acknowledge and understand. And I think, like, we talked about Bobby, we talked about Zach. And I think the other thing here too is, like, they brought Zach in on a one year $4 million deal, something approximating that last year, and, like, so they're mitigating risk with getting a high return. I think if you're going to pay those people that are coming in just because you know them a lot of money, that's one thing. But even Bobby Wagner didn't get a huge deal, right? It was all kind of measured, and that's good decision making. It's like there's the value that we just talked about, but we're also mitigating a lot of the risk. So that's where it's saying, like, I don't think anybody expected them, based on the number they were getting, to come in and play as well as they did, because if it was, they'd be getting a lot more money, right? So I think, like, that's the thing that I look at here is, like, yes, you are getting value from knowing the person, you're getting value from those relationships, you're getting value from the leadership, but the thing that was exponentially more valuable in this situation in this year for the Commanders in 2024 was how well those guys played, and they all played better than their contract. And there's nothing better than getting a free agent that exceeds the monetary value that you gave them. And so I think that's something that, again, like, it's this weird circular thing where it's like, yes, it's valuable that you know them, but what is that value? And this team didn't overpay, so the value feels even more acute because of, in addition to the relationship, how well they ended up playing.
Right. Because we knew them, we could put them in the right schematic stuff. We also know what kind of things we need to do to support them. And then the other kind of unrelated thing that popped to mind for me when you talked about some of the bottom up type stuff is that connection between the locker room and the coaching staff, where it all felt like one cohesive unit. And I would guess that there's not a lot of guys on this team that don't feel comfortable going to Dan with something, going to DQ with something if they feel it, because that's the kind of coach that he is. His door is always open, and I genuinely think that that's true. Whereas opposed to, like, some coaches might be like, my door is always open. And it's like, yeah, but there's like a laser tripwire on that thing. And if I go in there, it's not going to be good for me. That's just not how they do business here. But sometimes you need ears on the ground. And look, they only faced so much adversity last year. They faced some, like, they had that losing streak in the middle of the year. They had some injuries. There's some stuff that they had to deal with. Obviously, they were down in a ton of games, but, like, ultimately they came through. So there wasn't the type of pressure that a lot of teams feel in a season, in the way that the Bengals felt pressure all season last year because they started slow, right? But if things start to fester at the ground level, and you have ears on the ground in a way that doesn't feel like you're snitching or spying or whatever, but, like, there's genuine relationships, you also prevent stuff from bubbling up and becoming bigger issues. And I feel like when you have the kind of leadership that Zach and Bobby brought, and the other guys, and the connectivity in that locker room, again, it's just another way to not trip over yourself and make sure that you are unencumbered towards the highest level of success that you can find based off your talent. And I think the Commanders, through the eyes of most people, certainly the two of us, I feel comfortable speaking for us here because we've talked about it. They maximized last year. They got the most out of that group, and that's all you can really reasonably ask for within a season if you're a fan or an analyst.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I just wanted to call attention to in regards to this question of, like, things that are undervalued, overvalued when it comes to free agency, I think you want to, like we talk about all the time, you want to get good value in terms of bringing people in that you feel like are going to help you out, but monetarily you want their value to equal the money you're giving them. And I think one thing that cannot be overstated in terms of the importance of this is Jaden Daniels' addition to this team, right? Like, I know this is not a free agency thing, but, like, it does kind of, it's the cloud that looms over these free agent decisions from last year. Because in isolation, while those are good decisions, they appear to be significantly better because you have what seems to be a person on the verge of becoming a franchise quarterback. And I think, like, ultimately, like, every team is hunting for that, every team is looking for that, and you see the impact on Zach Ertz. And people say, oh, well, Zach Ertz had X many catches, he had this many touchdowns. He also, like, because of Jaden Daniels' ability on third down, because of his ability on fourth down, like, gave Zach, gave Terry, gave all these offensive pieces more bites at the apple. And so I think that's something else that makes this difficult. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, New England, when Tom Brady was there.
Yeah.
And, like, they brought in anybody. And you're like, man, this was a great free agent addition by Bill Belichick. And then all of a sudden Tom Brady leaves, and every decision just doesn't make any sense anymore. And so that's another thing that if you're trying to learn from this experience, it's always important to put that little asterisk there and say, yes, these are good decisions because the familiarity, because the experience, because the leadership, because of how they cultivated this locker room. But you always have this thing over top of it that is the franchise quarterback potentially, which is Jaden Daniels, which, and every single year, you know, you listen to talk radio, like these are things you have to negotiate. It's like, I think this because of this, but this other factor was always kind of looming and is going to affect this. And I think that's the Jaden Daniels effect, which, you know, makes this year kind of a mulligan in terms of free agency evaluations.
Yeah, it's also kind of funny too. The best thing you can have is a value at quarterback because you can overpay a little bit here, a little bit there, and get a little bit better players here, a little bit better players there. Right. And Brady took discounts in New England forever. Jaden's on a rookie deal. And I actually saw this. This is a crazy stat. The current top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in the league on AAV have not won a Super Bowl, with Purdy entering that realm the other day.
It's true, man. And like you think about like even like Jalen Hurts, you know, some of these guys, like they are like he was that team was at its best when he was not making a ton of money, right? Patrick Mahomes before he made a ton of money, like Brock Purdy in San Francisco before he made it. Like there is something to that I think is so important to understand. Like, and it's almost, I wonder if like the analytics, and we're kind of diverging from the question here, but I wonder if the analytics community is going to start saying like, you should just draft a quarterback every 5 years. And so you can keep the roster where it's at, quite honestly. Like, no, if you think the guy's good, great. But I want to make sure that the roster stays really well supported. Now you're kind of entering a
But then you're threading the needle of like, when does the guy that was a great young player on a rookie deal fall off a cliff? Like, how much is that guy worth? Like, it's just, can you get good dudes on rookie contracts always? Like, that's why the draft is so important. The quarterback can erase so much because while, you know, on that top 10 list are guys like Burrow, Lamar, Josh Allen, who have won a ton, and probably, if not for Patrick Mahomes, would have been, you know, Super Bowl champions by now. Obviously, Hurts has now been kicked off that list by AAV, although he signed one of the biggest deals at the time, you know, depending on the other metrics you look at, how he's the best at hiding the cap hit and moving stuff around. So their roster is insane, even though they do have a paid quarterback and they just won the Super Bowl. So it is kind of funny how it winds up coming together. That still, there's no doubt that a great quarterback is the most valuable thing in the sport. But I do wonder, are we kind of reaching the limit of like just how valuable those guys are, where teams are going to start to have true stare downs with their franchise quarterbacks and be like, no, I'm not going to pay you $65 million a year. And we'll see, you know, Jaden, the way quarterback salaries are going right now in 4 years or whatever it is, he's going to be getting like 70 or 80 if the cap keeps rising. But we'll see. That's a conversation. That's a mailbag 3 years from now, Logan. Take Command Mailbag, Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson with you. And Logan, we typically don't encourage multiple part questions. We typically don't encourage multiple questions in a single message. However, Austin has threaded that needle. Threaded that needle. Austin's done it successfully. He sent me a 4-parter. And honestly, they're all 4 good questions. We're going to answer 3 of them in depth, and I'll just tick off the 4th one after I read it off here. So sorry for the long read, but here we go. A few mailbag questions for you and Logan. Really enjoying the shows and all the breakdowns. I've been thinking about the NFL's player pathway program and the idea of developing non-football athletes into contributors. Question 1. If you could bring in any current non-football athlete to the Commanders, who would it be and why? 2. Which sports do you think translate best to different NFL positions on offense and defense? 3, which position is the quickest to learn for someone without a football background? And should the program target those spots more deliberately, or is it really just about getting the best athlete and figuring it out later? And finally, 4, how successfully do you think the player pathway program has been for the Commanders so far? Would love to hear your thoughts and keep up the great work. Thanks, Austin. Real quick on number 4. It's been solid. You know, F.A. Obata was a part of that program, and he was a contributor for a couple of years. You know, he was a part of the program with Carolina, and then came here with Ron and stayed on last year for a little bit. David Bada was, I think, their guy as well. And
he rotated a
little bit. I know you're super intrigued by the kid they have now. We'll see how it goes. But there's obviously not as successful as, say, the Eagles, who found Jordan Mailata. There's a couple other guys.
Semi Reyes was a guy for a little bit, obviously, that showed a lot of promise, but didn't. And I think that's the thing is like with the NFL pathway program, just in general, is you are kind of throwing a lottery ticket. You know what I mean? I think,
Totally.
this was like a week. I don't know if I told you I did this a couple weeks ago. I just went in like a deep dive of like the International Pathway Combine.
I know you didn't tell me.
And I just was like, who are these guys? And there's some freaky human beings in there, right? Just some big, long, athletic, fast people, right? But I think that's the kind of the crux of the first part of this question is just because you're big, fast, athletic doesn't mean you're good at football. And I think like answering some of those earlier questions might illuminate this last one a little bit more, honestly.
So let's do it. If you could bring in any current non-football athlete to the Commanders, who would it be and why?
I think like Ryan Hauser probably is one that comes to mind. He's the shot put guy. Is that his name?
Ryan Krauser. Yeah.
Ryan Krauser. Thank you. Just because like he's big and he's incredibly twitchy. He's one of those
like 6'7", like 320. He's monstrous.
320. He ran a 4.740. He's got like I think he's got like a 37 inch vertical. He's one of the most. So this is again like I'm going to kind of package these together. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to package these together. So when you look at sports that have been traditionally successful, like I've played with a guy who was from England. He was a shot put thrower, right? The reason shot put throwers work well is because the things that are in shot put, like explosiveness, size, like just raw horsepower, limb length, are all good for offensive linemen, right? Offensive and defensive linemen. And you are kind of dealing with, when you're dealing with track athletes, you're dealing with some of the freakiest human beings like of all time. So like when people say basketball players are the best athletes, like I'm kind of in my mind, like by what metric, right? Because if you're dealing with like lifting and pure power, you're not going to find a more explosive athlete than a shot put thrower, usually, right? Maybe an Olympic lifter kind of falls in that same category, like a heavyweight lifter, these guys that are just freaky, big, and explosive. So when you go down like shot putters, for example, if talking about International Pathway Program, a lot of those guys, like you'll see every year a guy that, is from, Lithuania, that is at Texas A&M, that is trying to get an NIL money. So he's trying to play football. And his combine is literally one of, like, I'm trying to remember, there was a guy a couple years ago who got signed to the Giants who was like 6'4.5". He was 345. I think he had like 15% body fat. He ran a 4.8 40 and he jumped 40 inches. Like, so on paper, you're like, this dude's going to be an amazing NFL football player, right? Because that's what track athletes are. They do well with that kind of stuff. The problem with throwers in general is they lack any kind of kinesthetic ball awareness or instinctive decision making. So even though they're these tremendous, like high upside, high kind of torque athletes, and I picked Krauser because he's the first one that came to mind. They do lack some of the in-game problem solving that becomes so important to playing the position, like offensive line, defensive line. Like the guy, for example, that I played with in Chicago would literally explode the offensive lineman every single play. Like I'm talking 2 hands to the chest. The offensive lineman would be 5 yards in the backfield, but the run would go for 15 yards because he had no awareness of like what he was actually trying to do. He was literally just doing a power clean into this and it sucked for that offensive lineman, right? It was a long day. It was terrible, but he wasn't good at football because he just was this raw, explosive, powerful athlete.
So that's where like the basketball player comes in to me by what metric? Well, a lot of them are probably 4.4 fast and have obviously great verticals, but they also have the ball awareness. They see angles really well. They have hand-eye coordination. There's a play. I was trying to think of would Nikola Jokic be good at football? And I think I settled on no. He is so plotting in the way he moves that I don't think that there's a twitchiness to him. But there's a play in Game 7, and his team, the Nuggets, got absolutely wrecked in Game 7 by the Oklahoma City Thunder. But he caught a ball on a post-up, and the way he was able to shield off the defender and catch the ball, spin, and then get a shot up was one of the most athletic things I've ever seen in my whole life. And there's a great article about 2-3 months ago in The Athletic by a guy named Rustin Dodd that talked about athleticism. And it was framed as a fun, like almost marketing way headline through like the dad bod stuff. And I think we talked about that actually at some point on the show.
And you did this on your other show.
Yeah, we did. We had Rustin on the Train with the Best show. And then Chris and I did a whole thing on it. But like, in that article, deeper beyond the dad bod craze of guys like Mahomes and Jokic and Luka Doncic, is other ways that you can test athleticism, from reaction time to hand-eye coordination to lateral quickness to some other things that are not in an NFL-style combine, but are really important to playing. And balance, by the way, was one where like Jokic has like a 19-inch vertical, but he's one of the sick, like this performance place P3 out in California. I know you've heard of, Logan. Like they have their own combine, if you will. They just kind of keep track of certain metrics for every athlete that they've ever trained. And Jokic is one of the highest athletic scores they've ever done, despite the fact that he has a 19-inch vertical, because he's so freakishly balanced, coordinated, all of those things. And so I think for football, for NFL football, you need all those things plus the twitchiness. So like my answer for this, always going back years, this guy's past his prime now, would be Russell Westbrook. Because if I tell you, you get a 6'3", 205-pound stick of dynamite who's also really coordinated, like that seems like a good NFL receiver. Like I feel confident. And also that dude hates everybody wearing an opposing jersey. Like Russell Westbrook is a freakazoid of a competitor. He's also has a very diva wide receiver mindset. So he particularly fit that position very well. I probably could think of others. Like I was also thinking about this earlier, like prime Derrick Rose before he tore up his knee.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what I was going to say.
6'4", the length, the absolute crazy twitch that he had, like he would have been incredible. Obviously LeBron, he's 6'9", 240 pounds, runs a 4.4 and has a 40-inch vertical. He was an all-state receiver in high school and could have been Ohio Mr. Football if he kept playing his senior year, and could have had a D1 scholarship anywhere in America to play football, and probably could have spent 10 years, 12 years at least in the NFL. Instead, he's maybe the greatest NBA player ever. So I'm trying to think of guys right now, but I do think there's a reason that besides like culturally, there's a lot of guys that played both sports growing up. I do think that there's a reason once you get into the hand-eye coordination and the ball skills, the kinesthetic awareness, that basketball tends to be the sport that crosses over. Although you can't do these 6'4", 185-pound guys because they would die.
Well, so I think that it's an interesting kind of lead in from a basketball standpoint, because I've played with basketball players too. And one of the things that is always really jarring for them is putting the pads on and playing receiver. And this is part of the question, like what is the easiest position to transition to? Any type of pass catcher. Like if you're consistently catching the football, like you're going to be okay. And so what I mean by that is like you look at Jimmy Graham, he's a pass catching tight end, right? He doesn't have to learn like the nuances of blocking. Antonio Gates and Anthony Gonzalez, like those guys did a great job taking a basketball skill set and applying it to catching a football in an area where like you don't have to win with great vertical speed anymore, right? You're just kind of winning, right? But I will say, like I've played with guys that are converted basketball players. They have a really hard time with the physicality. They have a really hard time with the physicality. And I think that's something that pops up as you say, oh, we have this great frame, LeBron James, this great frame. But there's also a reason that tall receivers aren't a thing in the NFL. It just the deceleration, acceleration mechanics for tall, long-limbed, long-femored players becomes really, really challenging. I'm not saying he couldn't be a good player. I'm not saying that at all. I just think it's important to say, like, the NFL is the ultimate natural selection. It selects out really tall players and it selects out really small players at pass catching spots. So that's why he might be able to be like this kind of pass catching tight end. I'm talking about LeBron James now, but I do think that's something that is a big hiccup for players, right? Is they have the athletic upside and they have the ball awareness, but they lack that kind of top end physicality. And so it's interesting. Like I wanted to do a point of comparison. Lacrosse seems to have a very high transfer to the NFL, like Hogan, Hubbard, some of these guys, because you do have great ball awareness, you do have great kinesthetic awareness, but you're also dealing with the pads and you're dealing with a certain level of physicality that is not seen in basketball. And so I do think like that's a position, that's a sport that tends to transition really well. Obviously, you have to be careful selecting for body type. It's the same thing with, Russell Westbrook or one of these smaller, skinnier guys, right?
Russ I pick because he's not quite as skinny as some other dudes.
Correct.
Right. Like that's the thing with like Derrick Rose. Is he twitchier? Yes. Or was he twitchier? Yes. But he's also a lot skinnier. Like Russ at least had, he's got some broad shoulders for a basketball player, which gives him a fighting chance. But I'm also like, how would that guy do it like corner?
Yeah, and but that's the thing that I would say to the original question. Like, it's really hard. Like, that's a very hard position to play, corner. It's very, very hard. Very, very. I think that's another reason why we're digressing a little bit, but why Jordan Mailata is such an interesting find is because talk about a position that's really hard to teach, really hard to get a feel for. Like, offensive lineman is no joke now, no joke. And so I think you see there's a reason that people transition to. I would say the easiest spots are like wide receiver or tight end if you're catching the football. If you got to be like a blocking tight end, obviously there's guys like Darren Felds who did a great job of that. But most of those guys, those basketball players who are transitioning over, only catch the football. That's all they do for their whole career pretty much, right? And the other one is defensive end specifically, because there's not a lot of like teaching involved. It's just like see ball, go get ball. And so I think like that's where the sweet spot is. Now, I do think like obviously there have been guys like from wrestling, for example. That's another sport that I think
that was one I was going to ask you about,
who have done a good job of like playing offensive guard. I forget the guy's name, but he played in New England. He had never played football. He played in high school, but he didn't play in college. He was like a D1 all-state wrestler or all-state wrestler, NCAA champion.
Yeah,
and then he was like looking for something to do, and they were like, "Why don't you come play football?" And the Patriots brought him in, and he was a starting right guard for like 10 years. And so like I think when you're selecting other sports, one of the things you have to select for, I think, are a physicality, like a mentality that you're looking for, right? Like a physical toughness. And then also like some of the explosive measurements, right? So like when we're talking about wrestling, like those guys are also incredibly freaky. Like Brock Lesnar's combine when he came and tried out for Minnesota is like legendary. He had like an 11-foot broad jump. He had a 37-inch vertical. You know what I mean? Like he bench pressed 225 like 37 times. Like those guys are freaks, right? And they have this kind of physical approach that's incredibly important. So that's where like lacrosse, wrestling, we talked about shot put, how it's got these kind of freaky long athletic guys. Basketball, if you're catching the ball, like I think it's a great transition. Those are kind of the sports I would circle. And then obviously like rugby, because it's an international sport, people look to it a lot. But I actually like, now that my son plays and I've played with rugby players in the NFL, the crossover is very, very minimal. So the fact that they're able to teach those guys anything is you're really kind of doing the same thing you're doing with wrestling, is you're taking a big athletic tough guy and saying, can we teach you how to play NFL football? And so I think that's where like you see the Jordan Mailata, because he's a one-of-one athlete anywhere, right? Like I remember I met him. Did I tell you this story? I met him in Atlanta when he was part of the International Pathway Program. And he was an awesome, just incredibly kind, sweet person. But he's 6'8", and I think he weighed in at 355 or something like that, but had like abs and like was kind of rocked up. And I'm like, there's only a certain number of people that look like you on the face of planet Earth. You know what I mean? So like you're betting on this incredibly athletic, lithe athlete. And I was talking to someone who played with him in Philly, and they were like, oh yeah, like he actually, his bone density is such that he could easily weigh 400 pounds and we wouldn't ask him to dock weight, because he's just that kind of frame, So like people look to Jordan Mailata and say, oh, like that's the way the International Pathway Program should go. It's like, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, if you can find a one-of-one athlete somewhere on planet Earth, which is kind of why I'm like, LeBron, would he figure out the deceleration thing? Yeah, because he's LeBron. Or like, could he be like Jimmy Graham? Like Jimmy Graham's not a great decelerator, but you get with a good quarterback like Drew Brees, you're a great frame, you got great ball skills, you have decent enough feel for zone and like. And you're actually big enough. Like there was a point in Miami where LeBron bulked up to like the rumor was he was 280.
Yeah. But that's the thing is like, if I had LeBron James and he was 280, this is going to sound insane to a lot of people. I just haven't played left tackle. I swear to you, I would. Like, I don't care how good he is at catching the football. Like, it's harder to find. There's a reason, like, it's harder to find a left tackle. It's almost impossible sometimes, right? So if you had the guy with LeBron's length, his athleticism, and he could play left tackle for the next 20 years in the NFL, I mean, you got to have the right wiring upstairs, but that's where I would probably go with that frame, as opposed to saying, oh, he's going to be this great pass catcher. I know LeBron probably would be pissed about that, but that's. Yeah.
I wouldn't even bother with him at tight end. I'd just be like, no, you're going to be that big and playing receiver, because he's also, when he was 280, he was still running a 4.4.
Yeah.
So
crazy, right?
That must be cool. Yeah, Mailata is also a freakazoid. When Rachel, my wife, was still coaching solid core in Philadelphia before she moved here, I'm pretty sure that she either coached him or had one of her friends coach him. Like when he was still new with the Eagles. Imagine that dude on a Pilates, a super mega former.
He's just like talk about the balance and like just like kind of these weird athletic traits that you can't quantify. Like I remember this was in the playoff game. I went and watched him warm up just like to see, and he just looks like a bear, And you're just like, and so that's why.
And he can sing. It's not fair.
What a weirdo.
But
I think like
talent.
For international pathway stuff, like those are the sports you're kind of circling, and then you're hoping you find a guy that is instinctive to learning a ball sport, or a different sport. And I think that's why rugby and lacrosse, basketball to a certain extent, wrestling.
Well, wrestling's got the kinesthetic, like hand-to-hand combat part of it, where it's like you're not shot put and track, or like track and field. You are so in your own technique. Correct. There is no defense. And in these other sports, it's like, oh, I have to react to another person, and that alone is a skill.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. So I think if you can find, and I think that's why those sports, like at least recently, have been more successful. I think rugby works because you're getting a huge pool of big freaky athletes. Wrestling is, think about it, there's only a couple guys that can go, they're like the heavyweights, right? So you're probably talking about maybe 1,000 guys in the country at college, like college wrestling, that
Yeah.
are good elite athletes. So it's a smaller pool. And then basketball obviously is a crazy pool. And then the lacrosse one has just been so interesting to me because they must be catching a lot of like just freaky athletes that don't play football. You know what I mean? That are, when it's time to make some money, let's go do this other thing. Because there was another guy, right, who played for the Falcons. He was part of the international pathway program for the Falcons, lacrosse player. Like, they just, it's something about that sport and how it meshes with football.
It's physical. You have hand-eye coordination. Like, you have to be fast. There's a lot of run. Like, it's full field. So that's the thing is, like, wrestling, like, dudes are in amazing shape, but like the running is not a part of.
That's why they
sport.
play O-line, right?
Right. 100%. 100%. Of course, the correct answer to all of this, that was a fun conversation. The correct answer is just get a soccer player to kick.
I didn't think about that, Craig. Has that happened? I guess that happens every year, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's some.
Every kicker in the NFL probably used to play soccer.
And then they,
and they were the one kid on their high school team was like, I'm going to go kick too. I don't want to do fall conditioning.
Yeah, I was a pretty good kicker in high school. Did I ever tell you that story, Craig?
Yeah, I know you played soccer in high school. I was about to ask.
Yeah, I was a very good kicker. Yeah.
Could you, like, if the year is 1968 and like before kickers become specialties, like, could you have been a dude who were you just born at the wrong time and you could have been George Blanda?
So yeah, like, I think that was, I think playing back 40 years ago would have been much more my speed. I had a coach tell me one time, like, to my face, and he was a compliment. He's like, you were born in the wrong era. Like, the way you play is just not for this time. Like, it's kind of trending towards like hyper athletes and good movement skills. Like, you're just a tough, gritty dude, right? So
tough, gritty dude who also could have been a good kicker.
Yeah, right.
1955 would have been Logan's prime year in the NFL. Wrapping up here on Take Command with Logan Paulson, I am Craig Hoffman. Your mailbag questions, you can submit them on Instagram at Hoffman.sports and at Logan_Paulson82. You can also get them in at HoffmanShow.com using the contact link. And Logan, this one was sent to you by Joel. Huge fan of yours, and I appreciate your work. I listen in often when you and Craig are doing your podcast, and it's very informative and entertaining. Thanks, Joel. I do have a question for you and was wondering if you have dissected this on the film previously. I was rewatching the Philly playoff game and noticed that that Trent Scott and Chris Paul were in a rotation at right guard. Watching the difference between the two players, there was a drastic improvement/difference when Chris Paul played, I think, for 3 drives. He lists them out. To be fair, I've always been a fan of Chris Paul and his ability to be stout and maintain a strong pocket. If he showed he can hold his own against Jalen Carter at times, knocking Jalen off the ball, and the Philly D-line, why do we not think he has a strong shot to start at right guard while Sam Cosmi is out due to injury? I think if Chris Paul gets a fair shot at playing right guard this season, I think he can be this year's Diami, a guy who obviously underperformed and then when given a bigger opportunity and some good coaching, blew up onto the scene. So, Logan, going into OTAs here, where do you put Chris Paul and his chances to emerge at one of the guard spots?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think when Chris Paul plays, he does a really nice job. He's got a great physicality. He's got great length. You can see his strength. Like, it's a unique thing. Like, we talk about kind of these international pathway guys and like their ability to be kind of freaky and big. And I think that's exactly what his superpower is, man. He's crazy strong. He's crazy explosive. Like, you can see his power just shocks guys. I think the thing that, and just watching Chris over the course of his career, which is what, 2 years now, 3 years now?
Yeah.
I think the thing that sticks out to me is like there's a slight lack of like football intuition. There's stuff that he does where like, so one of the things about him coming out of, where did he come out of? Toledo? Was that where he was from? Tulane?
Chris, Chris, he's entering year 4 from Tulsa. So close.
Tulsa, there we go.
Wrong T
school. So
school.
close. But when I watched him at Tulsa, like, he is just like this raw, crazy horse. Like, when you see his body posture, it's not something that you would say, hey, young guys, you want to block like Chris Paul. Like, he's just bigger and stronger than a lot of guys at Tulsa. Like, his pass set's a little bit off. Like, his feel for the pass rushing line is a little bit off, right? But he's so explosive and so powerful that you're like, we can make it work. And I think that's one of the reasons he's kind of stuck around the NFL, is because, again, like, the good is so good. Like, I remember his first start he had was against Philadelphia, and he's name your person, Fletcher Cox, like, he's walking that dude off the ball. The problem is, like, let's say we're in a slide. We talked about the man zone slide of a protection. I've got the center working to me. There is a certain feel and intuition that needs to happen there. And I remember watching him with Charles Leno when Charles Leno was here, and Leno's getting ready to pass off a guy on an inside move. And for whatever reason, Chris Paul, remember, it's a gap protection, right? So I've got my outside gap. So if someone's attacking that gap, the center's got to come over, help me out. I got to help the tackle out. And he would just let that guy kind of spill through. Sometimes you see it on combinations, right? His hat's not where it's supposed to be. He's behind the block, or he's ahead of the block and gets undercut. And so while the physical tools, I think, are incredibly impressive, like, really, like, I think he flashes, of the guys on the offensive line, like, his flashes are insane. It really, quite frankly, like, they're insane flashes. It's the nuance, it's the consistency of the nuance that I think is somewhat lacking. And I think it, like, it's one of the things where it's like, can he ever get enough reps to overcome his lack of coaching at Tulsa when he was there, right? Like, can he ever get that kind of experience and exposure to really warrant a starting spot? Because one of the things that you have to remember is it's not just about the physicality. It's also about the trust that he has with the coaching staff, right? Is he going to be able to do what he's supposed to do for 50 consecutive plays? And when you watch Biotish, when you watch Allegretti, when you watch Wiley, I know those guys get kind of burned on a little bit in the media. Like, they know what the heck is going on, and they're good professional offensive linemen. And Chris Paul right now, because of the lack of reps, really is not quite there yet. And that's the thing that's somewhat disappointing about the NFL, in my opinion, is it's not great at developing talent. And so you get this guy who obviously physically can do it, but there just hasn't been this great opportunity for him to cultivate and continue to grow, learning multiple systems, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it is funny to me watching the commentary around a guy like Chris Paul versus a guy like Andrew Wiley. Because any NFL coach would watch and be like, give me Wiley. And a lot of fans would watch and give me Chris Paul, because they don't realize Chris Paul's making the mistake. It's easy to see Andrew Wiley's mistake. He's in the right place and he gets beat. And you're like, well, son of a gun. That guy sucks. And you're like, actually, that just happens sometimes. And then you see Chris Paul, and like you're like, that's not, how could that be? He's over here, and you're like, yeah, that's the problem. He should be over there. So you see where Andrew Wiley got beat. He should have help, and the help should come from Chris Paul. So like that is the thing about offensive line play that I think sometimes is hard if you are watching a game on TV or even watching the film, like, unless you know the slides and you know the rules, you know the protections on that given week and all the tweaks and how they're adjusting to this player, that player. Like, do we have special rules for Jalen Carter? Like, if you don't know all that stuff, it can be really hard to do a true evaluation beyond saying, okay, when they get engaged, when they get the assignment right, how well do they execute it? And Chris Paul's pretty good at that. Chris Paul's pretty good at
he's excellent at it.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm where I'm supposed to be. Let me block someone. Bang, block. Okay, cool. Which is important. But I mean, football is so much assignment and alignment. And defense more so than offense. You hear that phrase, assignment and alignment, but obviously offense, it's really important too. And for offensive linemen specifically, if you don't understand where you need to be, you are setting up you're setting up either a mistargeted run where you're going to have a free runner at your back, or you're setting up your quarterback getting absolutely blasted. And that's just the kind of stuff that coaches can't live with. They'd much rather see Andrew Wiley lose slowly than Chris Paul let a free runner through. And that's not to say that he can't get better at that and isn't getting better at that. And maybe for that reason, it's year 2 in the system with Bobby Johnson, whatever, like, he could potentially, because the other thing about Chris is, like, he seems like a great dude. Like, A plus character. I mean, I remember last year when he was at the Senior Bowl, watching his brother play. And,
with his brother, that's right.
And there's the behind the scenes footage from Commander's Log where he's talking to Adam Peters, and just like the conversation is great. And you're like, oh, like, that's a good dude right there. And so I have no doubt that Chris Paul's putting in the work, but ultimately, like you said, are there the reps available for him to get better, show that off, and then ultimately earn a starting job? I think that is TBD when you have all these vets in front of him, from Wiley, who now might be in the mix inside, Connerly and Coleman, like, they're going to sort out right tackle, left guard. You've got
Nate
Allegretti.
Like, you've got a bunch of guys.
I was going to say Nate Herbig coming in is like a big one. Like, they signed him to be a part of a rotation potentially. So there's a lot of dudes in front of him. Now, if Chris Paul can win that job, that's great. Like, dude on a cheap rookie contract for another year, then you probably re-sign him fairly on the cheap, and like that would be amazing. But there's reasons why that hasn't happened.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that this isn't necessarily it's not Chris Paul's fault. And normally I'm the guy that says, "Oh, the players got to take initiative, they got to study, they got to do the thing." And like I still believe that, and I think Chris Paul's doing that. I think the problem with offensive line is it's more akin to a combat sport, right? Where the reps and the patterning and just seeing it over and over and over and over again is the thing that gives you value. So when you said, "Oh, like, are there enough reps to go around?" I think that's the exact problem with offensive line play coming from college to the NFL, is that there's a huge developmental curve for college offensive linemen, right? Because it's so much more complicated, it's so much more nuanced, and the techniques have to be so much more dialed in. And the only way you can do that is to be like, "Hey man, like, I'm going to pass block you, I'm going to run block you." And good luck finding someone to do that for you in the offseason, because it's not a thing, right? So I think that's where like the current offseason structure, and like, we're taking a little bit detour, but the current offseason structure, the way OTAs and mini camps are structured specifically for young offensive linemen, make this extremely challenging, right? For him to kind of consistently get better and improve. And again, like, I think if you're looking just straight physicality, like, he can for 100% do it, but it just, can he learn the 1-2 combinations? Can he pass off a stunt? Does he know what to do versus this pressure? Like, it's just a lot to ask on a limited rep structure.
Yeah, I almost wonder if for some offensive linemen that are kind of on that brink, would you be better off not signing like Chris Paul? I presume if this is year 4, will be a free agent after the season. Don't sign a contract. Go play in the UFL. Go like play actual football in the spring. Play well enough to earn a contract in training camp. Like, offensive linemen get signed late in camp all the time. You can make the team. Yes, you will miss the offseason install, but you'll actually become a better football player and get to play real football. Like, I actually wonder if that, one, if you were an agent, would you advise that? 2, is that actually functionally the better path?
Yeah, no, I think that's something that I think is really interesting and compelling, just because you're getting more reps. I think the problem is, in guys that I've coached with or helped coach that are in the USFL, is the coaching's, from what I understand from them, is not great. So you're kind of going back to a level of coaching that is maybe no longer developmental, and you're just kind of surviving. And so that's, again, the catch-22 is like, like, Johnson does a great job. Like, I was watching, I have a breakdown coming up for Command Center, and I was watching all the runs and all the RPO stuff. And I'm like, man, they did some really good stuff this year. And he got these guys coached up so they're all on the right page. And like, having that resource, there's only 32 of them, right? Yeah. And there's some that are better than others, but getting
on a team is also really important on the only 32 of them.
Correct. And so I think that's the thing where I look at, and I'm like, yeah, like, he could go do that and get a lot of reps, but ideally you'd want him to kind of be around the coach and say, "Hey, we're going to foster, we're going to make you grow." And it's crazy, like, looking at some of the young offensive linemen that were in the league last year, like Latham for Tennessee. Like, is he a good football player? Yeah, absolutely. But does he still have a lot of growing to do? Yeah. And I think that's where they'll give him those reps, because he's a first round pick. But Chris Paul is the 7th round pick of an old regime. Like, how many reps does he get? And again, like, I want Chris Paul to be successful. I want him to have a shot at it. I want him to make the team. But it just kind of maybe give some context about how tough that road is for him in terms of banking reps that he didn't get in college, I think is really what it boils down to. Yeah, for sure.
It's something that could be an interesting exercise for us. I guess we could do it next week if we really wanted to, is doing a 53 projection. And I know it's stupid early, and it's like, we would put a million disclaimers on it because we're us, and it's like, this is for entertainment purposes only. But like, as an exercise to be like, hey, this is how competitive it's going to be at certain spots. I actually don't think it's the worst idea. So put that in our back pocket. Or forget about it, because sometimes that also what happens when I say things haphazardly at the end of the show. What we do have next week for sure is a review of the OTA, because Wednesday it is an open session. So OTAs phase 3, the on-field actual football practices, or as much as you get of one in the spring. That starts next week, so we'll talk about that. Then we'll also have more of your mailbag questions on Monday or on Tuesday next week. So get them in, hoffmanshow.com. Use the contact link, Instagram at Logan_Paulson82 or at Hoffman.sports. On Thursday, I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what we're doing, but it'll be fun. It'll be around the Commanders. So if you like fun and you like the Commanders, we'll see you on Thursday. For Logan Paulson, I'm Craig Hoffman. See you next time on Take Command.